is yours.
Thanks a lot, Baltasar, for the nice presentation. And hola a todos, or hi everyone. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to the organizers for this great event. And just let me start right away by introducing myself. So my name is Marco. As you might guess, I come from Italy, Venice. And I moved to Vienna 2 years ago to join TU Wien as a researcher. I'm passionate about web security, and I like teaching a lot. Actually, like one of the things that give me most happiness is to transfer knowledge to other people. So like this is also a great opportunity to do so. I like hacking very much, and I've got a longer career in capture the flag competitions. I know that like last 2 editions of this conference, you had like a super nice top-notch speakers. So I will not spend too much time explaining what is a competition like this. But anyway, just like to be self-contained, this hacking contest, you can participate with a team. You solve security tasks that simulate real-world problems. The more you solve, the higher is your score. That's simple. I'm the founder of 2 Italian teams, Cookies at Venice, with whom I went several times to Russia to play RusETF. And you can see like some memory from RusETF over there. And I'm also the founder of Maccheroni, the team with whom I went to DEF CON in Vegas for 2 years in a row. I'm also the one to blame for the name, which is obviously the best possible name for an hacking team from Italy. What else? I'm also like one of the organizers of the cyberchallenge.it project before moving to Austria. And I was leading the national team in a cybersecurity competition organized by the European Cybersecurity Agency. So yeah, I think I'm also like a drum-and-bass DJ, but I don't think this is related with this talk. So as you can see, there is a lot of CTFs, a lot of background about the CTFs in my profile. And I think that the conference organizers were expecting me to talk about CTFs and hacking competitions. But this talk is not about CTFs. It's about research on web security, and more precisely on threat modeling, large-scale vulnerability assessments, and vulnerability disclosures. Anyway, when doing research, it doesn't mean that your mindset is supposed to change, and it's not that different from a CTF. Challenges are out there on the internet, just that there isn't someone telling you what to do. You have to come up with your own research questions and find the answers. And this typically involves having like a very deep technical understanding of the problem, brainstorming with your colleagues, coding, reporting, and this is exactly what you do during a CTF. So, of course, there are differences. So, for example, if you hack real websites, you go to jail. So, don't go to jail. Don't hack websites, please. You just like CTF competitions instead. You're also lucky to have one of the best European CTF teams at the Istituto Tecnico Superior, or Istituto Superior Tecnico, sorry, IST. Top-notch hackers coordinated by Pedro Dao under the name of STT. So just get in touch with them, drop them a line, and if you're interested in this work, and you will have a lot of fun. So let's start with the real talk now. What do we mean with threat modeling? Well, in a nutshell, it's the process of understanding the attacker's profile to design countermeasures. And this is easy to say, but like when you go to the web, which is the most complex distributed system in the world, this is a mess. This is extremely difficult. And this complexity makes the process of designing countermeasures, figuring out the attacker's capability and so on, very, very tough. New attacks and techniques appear on a daily basis, and the implications on novel security mechanisms are not even clear for researchers, like for web researchers. So believe me that even for me, it's difficult to stay up to date and have a clear picture of what's going on exactly. So imagine what could be the situation for an average web developer. So let's talk about the standard attackers in the web. If you're a site operator, then you're normally concerned about what we call the web attacker. This is somehow the baseline attacker model that everyone cares about. So web attackers can directly connect to the target website, like this, to exploit, to perform an exploitation, to mount an attack. Or something else, a little bit more interesting, is imagine that like the victim logs in on bank.com. So like there is a session that is established there. Then the attacker sends a link, like a phishing link, to the victim. The victim clicks on the link, and then like this link exploits a vulnerability on bank.com to exfiltrate sensitive information back to the attacker. The attacker also, like the web attacker, also controls a website that in the setting we call evil.com. And from there, it's possible to exploit the browser of the victim to perform authenticated requests to the target that is bank.com. Then high-profile sites are also normally concerned about another threat model that is called the network attacker. The network attacker is like a web attacker with the with the ability of mounting person-in-the-middle attacks between the victim and the target. So, for example, imagine that the victim connects to an access point that is controlled by the attacker. Then the attacker can read and write all the HTTP traffic. So these are the two standard models, okay, that everyone knows about. But then there is a third one. The third one is called the related domain attacker. And it's basically a traditional web attacker with an extra twist. It controls a website that is hosted under the same site of the target. So in this case, if you have like the target that is bank.com, then the website that is under the control of the related domain attacker is evil.bank.com, so a subdomain of bank.com. Related domain attackers didn't receive much attention in the security literature, at least not as much as the web attacker or the network attacker. And this is, probably due to the fact that they appear to be far-fetched, since, the owner of bank.com will never give control of its subdomains to untrusted parties. So before proceeding, let's try to clarify exactly what we mean with related domains. Okay, so two domains are considered to be related if they belong to the same site by sharing what we call a common registrable domain. Now, I don't have the time to go into the details of what exactly is a registrable domain, but just imagine that like you can go to godaddy.com, and this is like one of those domains that you can actually buy. Okay, so bank.com was available to be acquired by a company, and so it's considered to be a registrable domain. Okay, so clearly, since bank.com is registrable, www.bank.com and evil.bank.com are sharing the same registrable domain, and they are considered to be related. On the other hand, com is a top-level domain, and this is not registrable. And also github.io is what we call like a private domain, so you can't really register it because it has been marked as private by GitHub, so it's not something that is on the market or was on the market. And so like these two domains here are not registrable, and so this www.evil.com and mybank.com are clearly not related to each other. But also lavish.github.io and Wert310, that is the nickname of my co-author, .github.io, these also two are not related to each other. Okay, so good. What's the problem now with having a malicious site being hosted under a subdomain of a legitimate organization? First things first, let's see what evilbank.com is not allowed to do. Okay, so these two sites, www.bank.com and evil.bank.com, are still isolated by a fundamental web security mechanism that we call same origin policy. In a nutshell, this policy prevents websites from attacking each other. And imagine like a user who has a browser with two open tabs, like one like next to the other, one on a legitimate page of bank.com and another one on the compromised subdomain evil.bank.com. Okay, evil.bank.com can perform a request to www.bank.com, but the same origin policy is triggered at that point and prevents the browser from actually like reading back the response to this request. Okay, so like this is the intuition, and just like to make it clear, this is exactly the same policy, the same mechanism that prevents your favorite legal, of course, torrent website from potentially reading all your emails that are open on Gmail in the next tab. Okay, so this is the fundamental mechanism in the web. And this still applies to same-site content. But the SOP, anyway, is to be considered like the last line of defense. The problem here is that there is a lot of inherent trust put by users and browsers on same-site content. And this trust can be exploited by attackers who are in control of a subdomain. So let's have a look at this example. This is also something that you can try right away with your smartphone. There are two websites, goodsubdomain.personal.minimalblue.com and evilsubdomain.personal.minimalblue.com. Start Chrome and visit both sites in two different tabs, okay? You will see that there is no distinction on the URL. Like on the URL bar, on the address bar, they appear to be the same. There is no way for a user to distinguish them. This is why, because the mobile browser is only showing the rightmost part of the address, which is considered to be the most important one. But then the leftmost part that is discriminating between a good subdomain and evil subdomain is not shown. So again, this is a perfect opportunity for an attacker to mount attacks like phishing or malware distribution. And to make it worse, let's say that you have a password on bank.com, okay? Then the browser will display the password autofill prompt on all the related domains of www.bank.com, including evil.bank.com. And this opens the door to credential stealing attacks. Other protection mechanisms implemented by browsers simply do not apply to same-site content. You probably have heard about a new class of vulnerabilities that affect the design of modern microprocessors. Attacks like Spectre can be used actually to bypass the same origin policy. So browsers are implementing protections. And these attacks, just saying, are concrete. This is an article from 2 days ago, and it's about the first fully weaponized Spectre exploit discovered online. So we're not talking about the science fiction. We are talking about concrete stuff and really huge countermeasures deployed in the browsers. But unfortunately, the mechanism, at least the one included in Chrome, that is called the site isolation. As the name suggests, does not protect against attacks coming from the same site. And these attacks also, the same problem is with the cookies. There is a new cookie flag that is now turned on by default on modern browsers. And so modern browsers do not attach cookies to cross-site requests. It means that, let me give you an example again, your favorite torrent website will not be able to perform what we call an authenticated request to Gmail. So the cookie is not attached there because, again, Gmail cookies are not attached due to this protection that is called the same site. It's a flag on cookies. But again, for compatibility reasons, cookies are still attached to requests originating from a related domain. So this mechanism does not apply to same-site content. So now you should be convinced that there exists a same-site boundary, which is still weaker than the same origin boundary, but it provides opportunities for attacks if it is broken. So talking about what at the beginning of this talk I called challenges. Now we're doing research, so let's give them a proper name, so research questions. So the first one is, what are the possible attack vectors that can be exploited to become a related domain attacker? So I'm checking also with my right eye the questions in the main stage, and yeah, I will give you the link later. Don't worry about that. So I'm also monitoring them, but maybe we can discuss everything at the end of the talk if there is time. And also I think that we have a 15-minute session to just discuss about what I presented in addition to the time slot for the questions. So going back to the talk, can we find the new attacks? What are the capabilities also of a related domain attacker? Then second research question is, what are the threats to web application security of related domain attackers on major websites? Can, for example, avoid the confidentiality and integrity of cookies? Can we bypass web security policies? Or can we abuse JavaScript APIs? Last question is, what is the prevalence of vulnerabilities that lead to a subdomain takeover? And to this kind of vulnerabilities in general? How many subdomains can we take over? And how well is understood this threat among third-party service providers? So there are actually many ways to control a subdomain of a website. So we're talking about like attack vectors now. Think, for example, of a roaming service that you probably use daily, eduroam, right? We found that many institutions are offering eduroam are basically giving public IPs to their users, which are automatically associated to a subdomain of the institution's website. So this is my university, tuvin.ac.it. And when you connect it to the eduroam, you really get like this public IP and the subdomain. So it's like e255 blah 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 eduroam.tuvin.ac.it. In this case, there is a firewall between the internal network and the outside world. So one will think that then this is like totally safe and there are no problems at all. But this is not true, because it's still possible to run the attacks against the thousands of users inside the network. So like this is a concrete threat. Anyway, in this talk, I will not consider this special preconditions to mount the attack, and I will just focus on the attack vectors within the reach of standard web attackers who wanted to escalate their privileges. Okay, so we will talk about expired domains and discontinued services. So proper redaction matters, because these are actually two websites, two subdomains that are still vulnerable, from Lenovo.com and alcatellucent.com. So for obvious reasons, I had to redact them. Yeah, so what's the problem here? So subdomains can point not just to IP addresses, but they can also be an alias for another fully qualified domain. So now I can't show you, okay, but like this is a subdomain of Lenovo.com, and this is a fully qualified domain name. So it's like xxxg-lenovo.com, all right? So if the domain name pointed by the subdomain is expired, then an attacker can simply go to a company selling domains and register it. So we use GoDaddy to do the probing, and we just like $13 each, we could be able to mount a subdomain takeover attack on these two major websites. Another important attack vector to become a related domain attacker is caused by discontinued services. So third-party services are widely used to extend the functionality of a website. Think about like a website operator who wants to offer a blog platform, then like you can just use WordPress and integrate WordPress within your domain. And you can do the same with Shopify, that is a Canadian, I think, a company offering eShop solutions. Sometimes you also wanted to, just simply publish some static HTML pages, and GitHub Pages is perfect for that. So this example is about that, because it's like pretty simple to understand. So this is an example now fixed, hopefully. No, it's like really fixed. I checked. About iterm2.com, which is probably the terminal you're using if you are on macOS. So we found that GitHub iterm2.com pointed to some IP addresses owned by GitHub. And this is exactly what you will do if you wanted to use GitHub Pages to host your content under your own subdomain. The next step at this point, if you wanted to complete the mapping, is to create a new repository on GitHub and associate it to your own domain. The problem is that we didn't find any repository with such mapping. So attackers could just create their own repository and set github.iterm2.com as a custom domain, as shown in the picture here. We found this kind of impersonation vulnerabilities in many services, actually, like in 26 services that we analyzed. And we also identified the capabilities that an attacker obtains after registering a service. So for example, just like to let you understand what I mean with capabilities, on GitHub, you have full control over the content that is hosted by the platform, okay? You can upload files, you can upload HTML pages, JavaScript, and everything. So it's okay. On Shopify, you cannot upload arbitrary files, but you can upload custom themes. And inside the theme, you can insert your custom JavaScript code. So you can see that the capability here is JS, but there is no file capability on Shopify. We also give a look at the dynamic DNS providers, basically services that let you point a subdomain to any IP you want to host your own projects, stuff like this. And the situation here is even worse because we found that just by creating an account, you automatically control a subdomain that is related to all the other subdomains that are made available by the platform. So you become a related domain attacker without doing anything bad in this case. So we found this attack vector to be extremely pervasive. For example, last week, before giving this talk, actually, I wanted to double check if there were leftover vulnerabilities on the ulisboa.pt website, so the website of your university, if you're students here. And I found one caused by a subdomain of technical.ulisboa.pt that pointed to an expired account on WordPress. So luckily, I got in touch with Baltasar, who gave me the contact of the responsible security person, who promptly fixed the vulnerability in a matter of minutes. But anyway, don't worry, don't feel bad about this, because really many educational institutions are affected by this kind of vulnerabilities. And also my university, TU Wien, was affected by the same attack vector. So we also discovered new threats due to the use of DNS wildcards. Assume that you are a site operator and you wanted to offer an eShop at shop.example.org. And to do so, you configure the DNS so that you say all the subdomains of shop.example.org now point to the Shopify server, okay? And you do that by putting these asterisks here. This works just fine. If you clearly, so you have also to go to Shopify, and then you create a shop. And then on the profile of your shop, you say, okay, now I connect the existing domain shop.example.org. Okay, so it's this connect existing domain feature on the Shopify website. And again, this is fine. And also you have a nice bonus that is an automatic redirection from www.shop.example.org to shop.example.org. So great, right? And this feature was also actively used by many websites. And they were using the two versions of the others, the domain, interchangeably. So they were using, so this is shop.fox.com, for example. This is a dump from Web Archive, because now they removed everything. And you can see this is the frequently asked question page. And you can see that we're using www.shop.fox.com in some places of the page, and in other places that were just referring to shop.example.fox.com. The problem here is that in this configuration, an attacker can just create an account on Shopify, set an existing domain to their own account, www.shop.example.org, and profit. Because at this point, the legitimate automatic redirection is broken, and the attacker controls the www prefixed version of that subdomain. So even if it's known that wildcards in general are dangerous, we show that site operators do not expect services to allow other users to register subdomains of already mapped domains. And clearly, also this redirection thing amplifies this inherent trust placed by site operators to service providers. To give you some numbers, we found that 74 shops were vulnerable on Shopify, including shop.fox.com. We received a $1,000 bounty, although they said that the vulnerability was not in the scope of their bounty program, so they thought it was really relevant. And among the analyzed services, we also discovered similar issues on 17 out of 21 services that we analyzed. Concerning the threats to web security, web application security, we wanted to understand what is the gain of a related domain attacker compared to a standard web attacker. And we proceeded by listing all the domains that are related to those that we found vulnerable to a subdomain takeover. And for each site, we took up to 200 of the most relevant subdomains. And we studied the security implications of 5 different web security mechanisms. Now, I don't have time to go into the details of each of these mechanisms, because otherwise the talk would took 2 hours, and we have other amazing speakers in line, so I don't want to steal their time. But I will give you just a couple of examples so you can understand what I mean with this. So cookies. Let's talk about cookies. Cookies set by the main website, say example.com, can actually be linked to all the subdomains of example.com. And similarly, or worse, an attacker in control of a subdomain of example.com can set cookies for all the related domains. So really, if I have control of evil.example.com, I can set cookies for example.com, which is extremely bad. And this is what we call like a problem of integrity of cookies. So you can easily imagine what is the power of a related domain attacker in this setting. Talking about another mechanism, I will discuss briefly about the CSP. CSP stands for Content Security Policy, and originally it was used to start to mitigate XSS, so like scripting attacks on websites. And now it became like a way to include all the possible protections. And like if you don't know where to put something, you put it inside the CSP. But anyway, like it is widely used to prevent inclusion of malicious content inside a page. And it is also used to prevent a page deploying the CSP from being embedded by malicious parties, like in an iframe. Okay, you use the CSP for this. So what we found is that policies are based on allow lists, obviously, but like these allow lists have like milder restrictions on related domains. And we identified like similar problems on all the other mechanisms. So about measuring the prevalence of these threats in the wild. So we developed a complex pipeline. It is a lot of code, really a lot of it, that can automatically identify vulnerable websites and reconstruct, interestingly, full attack chains starting from subdomain takeover to the application vulnerability. So we started from a list of the top 50,000 websites. And from there, we did like a DNS, let's say you go like subdomain enumeration, and we verified that we had 26 million of valid subdomains out of this 50,000 websites. Afterwards, we used our component that is called RDScan. It checks for subdomain takeover vulnerabilities, and we identified 1,520 vulnerable subdomains in 887 vulnerable sites. So we say that a site is vulnerable if it contains at least one vulnerable subdomain. So this is the intuition. And we found many major websites affected, like CNN.com, Cisco.com, F-Secure, Harvard, Lenovo.com, your university. If we just restrict the scope, the analysis to the websites under the .edu, like educational top-level domain, we found that 7.3% of them are vulnerable. If we do like a manual investigation of like what are the websites that are really like websites of universities, then the percentage is even higher than that. Okay, so talking about web threats, we inspected, we analyzed the deployment of cookies, CSP, and other mechanisms, and we found that integrity issues are there all the time, like 99% of the time we found integrity issues on 23,000 related domains that we can basically attack. CSP policies are just broken in general. So CSP is badly deployed. There is a lot of literature on this. But anyway, we managed to get a gain compared to the related domain to the web attacker. It is like quite good, of 138 websites. Course allows us to bypass the same origin policy. And here also we had a noticeable gain. And domain relaxation is a legacy system, a legacy web mechanism that now like should be deprecated, but still out there. And this allows only related domain attackers to mount this kind of attacks. So clearly, like we collected a lot of vulnerable websites, and with great power comes great responsibility. So the problem is that being responsible is really hard, because it's difficult to identify the correct security point of contact of a website. So what we did was to collect the possible security contacts using different sources. So we started from bug bounty programs, Then we used like this new proposed standard called well-known security TXT, where you say, okay, like in my website, this is the security person to contact if there is like a vulnerability to be disclosed. Then we use a database that is public, that is like organized by, coordinated by a company. This is called LabUsix. And then we also perform manual whois queries to search like whether there were like contacts of the system administrator inside those in the responses of those queries. The problem is that we couldn't manage to find a point of contact for actually like the majority of the websites. And so like we gave all these websites to our national CERT, and they should have taken care of like disclosing the vulnerabilities with the interested parties. So what happened like 6 months later? Well, not a lot, sadly. So we ran a new subdomain takeover vulnerability scan 6 months after the previous one, and we found that only 15% of the subdomains have been fixed. So like the fix rate was pretty high on the sites that we managed to contact directly, but it was around like 10% on those contacted by the national CERT. Shopify paid us but didn't fix the vulnerability. GitHub is doing something, so like GitHub is in process. And FreeDNS, which is a dynamic DNS provider, is completely unfixable because they are offering like 50,000 domains that are considered to be registrable. So like you are immediately a early domain attacker to everyone else. So, and now I'm concluding, what can you do? If you're a site operator, you should check your DNS records all the time to allow, to prevent this kind of threats to happen, okay? So this is the required actions that we sent when we were disclosing the vulnerability to all the interested parties. Okay, so we say subdomains having a CNAME DNS record pointed to an expired domain should not occur. And then like you should take care of unused third-party services like GitHub Pages, WordPress, Shopify, and so on. Don't use wildcard DNS records if possible. And then also like pay attention at subdomains pointing to a deprovision cloud instance. And also, please, if you are a site operator and you are watching this talk, use well-known security.txt because we are happy to disclose the vulnerabilities with you, but we need to figure out a way to get in contact with you automatically, not manually. If you're a user, well, sadly, there isn't much you can do. The recommendations here are the standard ones, because as we saw before, browsers put a lot of trust into same-site content. So just be vigilant. Don't click on random links to avoid phishing attempts, and use a separate browser or incognito mode when visiting sites that are not trustworthy. And this concludes my talk. I'm happy to take your questions, and thanks again for having me here today.